Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Come on in. We'll be starting in just a minute. Welcome. Come on in. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and get started while we get going here. I have the chat going. If you could just introduce yourself in the chat, I want to make sure it's working for you before we get into the questions. So hello and welcome to Office Hours, the session where you can get your questions answered. I'm Chris Austin, the publisher of Maven's Notebook, and I'll be your host today. I'm joined today with a group from Sustainable Conservation, and today's topic is groundwater recharge. So in case you're not familiar, I publish the website Maven's Notebook, California Water News Central. So if by chance you are unfamiliar with it, visit mavensnotebook.com and check it out. I'm flying solo today, so I'll be working from the Q&A. Please enter your questions in the Q&A, as I really won't be able to look at the chat. In the Q&A, you will also have the option to upvote questions that you're interested in hearing answered, and I will work in the order of the most upvoted questions first. The goal is to get as many of your questions answered as I can in the next hour. And I'll be sending a follow-up email to everyone who registered that will include a link to a recording of the session and additional resources. So let's get started. Groundwater recharge is crucial for replenishing aquifers and a key tool for sustainable groundwater management. Sustainable Conservation is a California nonprofit that is helping to meet California's water challenges head-on through creative thinking and sophisticated resources. That's a quote from their website, but I really think it does exemplify what Sustainable Conservation is doing. They have been a leader in finding innovative solutions for groundwater recharge and floodplain restoration, and they've implemented numerous projects across the state, and they have a wealth of resources available on their website. So I have 4 folks here from Sustainable Conservation joining us today to talk about groundwater recharge. So welcome to Office Hours. So please introduce yourself and tell us what your position is there at Sustainable Conservation.
Great, I'll get us started. My name's Rochelle Young, and I'm the Senior Director of the Water for the Future program. Thanks so much for having us, Chris. I'll pass it to Aisha.
Welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aisha Massel. I'm our Program Director for our Water for the Future program. I'll pass it on to Joe.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Chaparena, and I'm our Water Resources Project Director. I'll pass it over to Charles.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Charles Delgado. I'm the Policy Director here at Sustainable Conservation and appreciate the opportunity to speak today.
All right, welcome everybody. Okay, so Sustainable Conservation has a whole bunch of resources on groundwater recharge and other things available on your website, and I put some links in the chat. So tell us what resources you have available.
Sure. Well, we included first just our broad technical resources page. So this has a wealth of information on groundwater recharge and a couple of other topic areas that are important to our organization. So definitely encourage folks to peruse that website and see, what captures your interest and dig in more. Some other materials that we linked are our recharge methods manual, which also includes a few case studies that I think will be of interest to folks on this webinar. We have program guidance for districts that are interested in creating programs for their irrigation districts. This really comes from lessons learned of, what works, challenges, etc. And another resource that we included are our incentives and strategies report. And this is really helpful to, kind of see how to scale these programs, thinking about, those incentives that growers help growers to participate at higher levels. Finally, we included some work from 2021 that looks at water quality guidance, and that guidance is available in both English and Spanish.
So now I believe sustainable conservation really pioneered on-farm recharge. So how is on-farm recharge being used these days? Are you able to get more farmers adopting it?
Well, we first started this work in 2011 with Don Cameron. It was a pilot. He invited us to come see what he was doing on his farm, and he had been doing this for 30 years. And so he's a really great innovator in this space. Our organization was really impressed with what he was doing and saw the potential of this to scale in the Central Valley and across California. And so this has really become a big chunk of our program's work over the past 13 years. The benefit of on-farm recharge is really tapping into agricultural and working lands to spread wet year water on working landscapes and get it to recharge into our underground aquifers. And the benefit of that is that our groundwater storage is much more abundant than our surface water storage, and it's much cheaper than surface water storage as well. So it's just a huge opportunity, very economical. And so we're excited to be helping to scale on-farm recharge. And we've done so through a number of projects that I'd love for our other team members to weigh in on. So maybe Joe and Aisha, you can talk about this as well.
Sure. Yeah, we've done a lot of work with growers in general, individual growers, but also irrigation districts and other water districts, and working through their, developing farmer field days and workshops to gain other interest from other growers, and really just facilitating growers that are already doing this or who have done this successfully, and getting them to talk to other growers about what was successful for them, and what are some challenges they had for others to avoid. And also working with ag trade organizations like the Almond Board of California and American Pistachio Growers. So lots of different avenues that we've worked with, but really leveraging our key contacts and relationships in the ag community. And so those are a few things. And I don't know if Aisha, you want to add anything else to that?
Yeah, I would just say, we're one of many entities working on groundwater recharge, especially after the year 2023, when there was just so much floodwater available. We saw a great increase in interest in recharge in these flood year events. And so just want to call out that there's a lot of folks working in this space in many different avenues, including academics, other nonprofits, state agencies, even some federal agencies. And you can really learn more about that whole community of people at floodmar.org. Floodmar stands for Flood Managed Aquifer Recharge. There's a ton of folks working on this, and we're one of them.
Yeah, a whole network of, as they call it, the Floodmar network. Okay, want to start getting to your questions, so please enter them in and vote up the ones you're interested in, and I will start up here at the top. Traditional percolation ponds require periodic maintenance to remove fine sediments that build up, impeding infiltration. Have fine sediments been observed accumulating on agricultural lands where Floodmar has been applied?
I could take the first stab at that. Water districts are very concerned of that sediment buildup, and so they typically flush their system. So in the winter months, when they dry out their canals and do maintenance on their canals, which could entail weed removal and various other things, they then, once they first kind of charge their system, let water infiltrate in through their canals and earthen basins, they really let the sediment and fines and all of kind of the trash just run through their district first before really releasing it out to their dedicated recharge basins and to grower agricultural lands for on-farm recharge. And some techniques that they use to reduce fines and sediment buildup in their recharge basins, their dedicated recharge basins, is having multiple cells, like smaller sediment basins, before that water goes to their main dedicated recharge basin. So for the most part, I haven't heard too many issues with agricultural fields getting fines from doing recharge. And then other more sophisticated recharge systems like subterranean reverse tile drain systems, which are below the root zone of crops. Those are typically run through like sand media filters, which are used to filter water before going through drip and microjet sprinklers. So there is an option also of running water through your typical irrigation filtration system before doing recharge as well.
Any others? Okay, I'll say one thing that I remember, Yolo Basin, the folks out in Yolo County, they said that their first flush, when the flows came up to the point that they could divert, they learned that they had to let some of that go through because the sediment was highest. So if they let some of that flow go past, then they would divert on the tail end of that, which means they couldn't divert as much water, but what the water that they did for divert didn't have the sediment in. So that's one of the things that the Yolo County Basin people did. Okay, let's see, next one. What are the biggest roadblocks you're seeing that are preventing broader adoption of groundwater recharge?
So I can speak to this a little bit. To start, there's a number of just sort of logistical roadblocks that have to do with, traditionally our water infrastructure in the state has been, designed around the water projects and this idea of, more or less predictable flows from the Sierra snowpack and other sources in the Colorado River. The post-climate change world, we're finding that that's not sufficient, and that we have to really be open to recharge as an increasing part of that portfolio. So there's a lot of places where just conveyance infrastructure isn't necessarily there yet. Available water for recharge can be a roadblock, and this is a lot of places that have traditionally done recharge projects with surface water rights. There's less water to go around, so that's become a challenge. But there are a number of structural kind of regulatory roadblocks that we're working on. And I hesitate to use the word roadblock because I really want to use this space to give the state a lot of credit because they have really, seen the importance of pursuing these projects in a responsible manner. And so over the past several years, we've seen a lot of progress on this. So I view this as a process that we're beginning, and that we're going to keep perfecting as we move forward. The more we learn about how recharge is done, and the more, that we have more projects to get more information from, the better we're going to be able to design these programs. One of the things that we need to work on is on the water rights side. So the State Water Board in recent years, again, having seen the need for these projects, has developed a number of water rights mechanisms to get at this. We have temporary permits that have been established, the 180-day and the 5-year permit. And then we also have a expedited appropriative water right for GSAs and for recharge in that space. So I view these programs as sort of in the beginning stages of implementation. We've heard that there are some challenges to accessing these permits for those that want to do this under the water rights system. And so, we have an ongoing conversation with the State Water Board, and that we're hoping to return to that later this year. But really making sure that those existing water rights processes are fine-tuned to the point where those that want to do recharge and can go through the system are able to do so in an expeditious manner. That's really a big priority there. And And then really there's other kinds of recharge. There's another question which I won't get into yet, but we've seen a lot more recharge happening without the water rights system. And this was touched on last year through some executive orders. And so that is especially an area where we're learning more. And we're learning specifically about where the best areas, to do this are under, how do we establish flood conditions? And then how do we do this while safeguarding water quality for communities and for the environment? There's a lot that we're still sort of researching. There's a lot that we need to see in the field to really get a better understanding of how to do these practices, and then also how to coordinate the information that's being generated from these. So as I said, the agencies we work with, the folks that are, helping to pioneer these practices, we've encountered just, tons of willingness and energy to work on this process. It's just, we're going to learn and we're going to keep making it better.
Okay, great.
I'd like to
Um,
add to that, Chris.
please.
Charles touched a lot on the policy and legal side, and those are huge areas that are important to our organization. A couple others that are big barriers for scaling and implementation are technical, understanding, and this is particularly a challenge for putting water on farms, is understanding what crops are compatible at what times of year, particularly considering growing season. And so that's an area where our organization has done quite a bit of technical assistance in working with growers. We have an agronomist on staff that works closely with growers to help them understand and mitigate risks to their crops. So technical is certainly important. Understanding soil types and soil suitability for recharge, that's another really important area. Financial incentives are a big piece too. And so one piece of work that we've been really excited to work on is with the USDA NRCS on how we can potentially turn recharge into a practice that is covered under their EQIP program or environmental quality incentives program. And that would make it where growers could get compensation or a financial incentive for participating in recharge. And so we're really hopeful that that becomes an improved practice under EQIP, because certainly a financial incentive would go a long way in helping to scale it. And then finally, preparedness is really, really big. So, one thing that was a huge lesson from 2023 is that recharge and doing recharge is not a wet year activity alone. It takes laying a lot of groundwork and preparation in the dry years as well. And so those that had been preparing for a year like 2023 were able to really make the most out of it, whereas others were scrambling and missed a lot of opportunities.
Yes, definitely. And one incentive that the folks down in the Tulare Basin did is that they had an accounting system, and they were able to credit the growers who did recharge. They were able to credit their water so that they would have, if they recharge water now, they could get that water later on in the year. So they were very motivated to do that, especially because they are facing Sigma intervention. Okay, next question. And folks, please upvote. We have a lot of questions in there, so upvote the ones you're most interested in hearing answered. My understanding is that aquifer soils don't fully rebound with recharge water after it's been pumped out. Is there a concern that land subsidence impacts may worsen by pumping recharge water?
I'll take this one. So I think the question is, you're talking about water, aquifers that have subsided, due to pumping. Yeah, there's a lot of work out there. I'm not an expert in this, but I do know that it's pretty complicated. And so a lot of the subsidence that's occurring in the San Joaquin Valley is due to pumping that's happening from below the clay. So the Corcoran clay layer is a huge very thick clay layer that's mostly impermeable through much of the central part of that, the San Joaquin Valley. And so when we're doing recharge, we're actually recharging on top of the clay. So unless we're doing it off the clay, which it might slip under the clay layer and eventually recharge underneath. So not really answering this question, but when we're doing recharge, we're actually recharging above the clay layer. And so the potential is to be able to utilize water above the clay rather than continue to pump from below the clay. In terms of being able to kind of refill a subsided aquifer, I'm not sure that we can do that, though I would, point to geologists more to ask that question.
Just to add to that a little bit, there are certain areas where the clay layers might be in lenses where water can maneuver around those lenses and eventually get down to the deeper aquifer. But Aish is absolutely right. Like a lot of recharge, depending on how uniform that like Corcoran clay layer is, could stay in the confined aquifer above.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a problem. Can't really recharge below that layer, that clay layer. What is the state of technical research for targeted large-scale deep recharge? Well, what do you know? To aquifers that are and have massively subsided. So targeted large-scale deep recharge.
There are some folks that are, doing injection wells, of course. So basically bypassing the clay layer, using surface water to pump it down into the lower aquifer. That's expensive. There's a lot of pumping costs associated with that. Also, when you're looking at, we work a lot in the realm of flood so using flood water for recharge. And so those flood events can be pretty episodic and brief. And so there's a question of how much water we could actually pump with, down into the bottom layer with that, with just flood water. But I think there's a bunch of folks working on that. We don't specifically work on that. We work mostly on the floodmar aspect of spreading it onto the surface, but we're exploring things like subterranean recharge, not so much injection wells. So for that, I can't quite answer. I'm not sure if anyone else has more information on that.
Just to add to another barrier with those deep injection wells is they're very challenging for permitting. Because if you're injecting recharge water into the aquifer, it basically needs to be treated to drinking water quality standards. So that adds a lot of costs and more infrastructure and is more challenging to get permitted as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Are there precedent projects to look into which avoided water rights paperwork by using unchannelized flow like urban stormwater?
So I'll take that one.
Okay.
So the answer to that is that there is precedent. I hesitate to use the word avoided water rights because there's a number of cases. I mean, there's definitely avenues where it's appropriate for recharge to be done outside of the water rights system. We saw this, we spoke about our on-farm recharge work earlier. A lot of that definitely takes place. This is not water that someone has a surface right to and is diverting specifically for the purpose of recharge. This is, precipitation and high flow events that are being put onto land where it's appropriate to do recharge. So there was a lot of that work in the on-farm realm would fall under that. There was also a number of more organized efforts. We knew of a few districts that prior to 2023 were basically delivering water for the purpose of, giving it to, or not giving it, but, making it available to landowners that were able to do this kind of work. And then they were able to apply water to those acres for the benefit of the basin. So I'll talk briefly about the executive order, which I alluded to earlier. This was early 2023, and the governor's office issued an executive order that specifically allowed for the diversion of flood flows under certain conditions for the purposes of recharge without a water right. And there was a number of projects that utilized that executive order authority. Those projects the information was collected by the State Water Board and published on their website, and they continue to do that. That authority was then codified last year in SB 122. So now it's the law of the land that this is a process that folks can avail themselves of. I won't get too deep into some of the incentive structures because I know there's another question about leave behinds, which we'll get to, I think. But the tension there is that the water can be diverted for recharge without a water right. That does mean that there is no clear pathway to subsequent use of that water or its ultimate fate. So that's largely left up to the GSAs in the appropriate areas. And there's a number of different approaches the GSAs are taking around that. We already heard about the fact that in Tulare, there's a GSA that's already giving credits under their allocation system for recharge. That's a pretty advanced solution, but a lot of other folks are still exploring, how to handle, that water that goes into the basin, because ultimately everyone has an eye towards sustainability. But we also do need to, have an incentive structure that makes sense, that's getting us to sustainability, but is also motivating and giving people reasons to pursue this kind of work. So it's a relatively new phenomenon in the sense that it's happening under this organized authority that's been put into place. But there's definitely precedent and there's some projects to learn from, and we hope that's going to enable more projects, and then we'll just keep building that knowledge.
Okay, great. Next question. Have you been able to document whether infiltrated water is reaching the groundwater strata from which local pumping occurs?
I'm happy to take the first crack at that.
Okay.
But yeah, we have direct experience, which looking at like groundwater fate, so where the recharge water and seeing how and if it does reach the aquifer, and that can be done. We did a project with North San Joaquin Water Conservation District several years ago near Lodi on one of our on-farm recharge pilot sites with a wine grape grower there by the name of Al Costa. And the district hired an engineer who is now their district engineer to look at the rebound effect of the water levels at various different, these were mainly ag production wells, just in all directions of this field. And really, this on-farm recharge vineyard is very close to the McCallamy River. So they were kind of concerned to see, like, is a lot of this water going back to the river, or are we seeing increases in groundwater? And we did. We saw a lot of increases to the local wells. And Rochelle mentioned the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service pilot incentive program. And we are partnered with USDA on that project. And all of the sites, NRCS looked at various aspects of those sites to basically test the effectiveness. And one measurement was looking at changes to depth in groundwater. I just saw Don Cameron on Friday, and he mentioned from his recharge at Terradova Ranch, at his ranch, that he saw pretty significant, like 12 to 15 feet elevation gains. So it very much does reach the aquifer, and every site is unique, but in general, you do see changes to the aquifer levels when doing recharge.
Okay, great. Next question. Are shallow subsurface artificial groundwater systems more beneficial than traditional recharge?
I can take the first crack at that one too. So that subsurface piping infrastructure below the root zone of typically a permanent orchards or vineyards. One of the main benefits of that is that since you're doing recharge below the root zone, you're not mobilizing or flushing the fertilizer and nitrogen within the root zone that allows it to stay in the root zone and gives it longer time for the crop to utilize those nutrients. And so there is a big groundwater quality benefit to using those subsurface piping recharge systems. So yes, that is one benefit to that type of system with groundwater quality, and even just not losing the economic value of fertilizer that a grower is putting on. If anyone would like to add to that.
Yeah, I would just say that kind of what you're doing recharge for really matters when you're answering that type of question, like which is better. It's kind of in what is your intent and your purpose of doing recharge. And so you might want to have other types of intents for recharge, such as you also want to provide some habitat for shorebirds on the way down, or provide some benefits to groundwater dependent ecosystems. So in that case, or at least in the shorebird habitat, you need ponded water. And so having a subsurface recharge would not really get at that. So it kind of really depends on your purpose. Similarly, if you're targeting recharge for community drinking water wells, you want to make sure you're at the right location. So it almost doesn't matter if it's shallow subsurface or if it's ponded. If it's not in the right place with the right conditions, then it's not really going to benefit it. So I would say it's just, you got to take a look at what you're intending to optimize your recharge efforts.
And just one other benefit of, again, like a below the root zone recharge system is a grower would just not be putting the risk, crop health risk, by, let's say, keeping soil saturation levels or reaching soil saturation levels in the root zone. So there's definitely a crop health and yield benefit as well.
Okay, next question. Certain regulators have concerns about the introduction of pollutants to groundwater aquifers associated with increased surface and vadose level infiltration, while others are of the opinion that increased flows to aquifers can dilute existing groundwater pollution and result in a net benefit, along with the natural treatment of stormwater through infiltration. Is this something that needs to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis per regulatory agency, or is there work being done to reach a state-level consensus?
I'll go ahead and take the first crack at this, and then our folks are doing work in this area, so I'll turn it over to them. The short answer to all of that is yes, but to get more specific, water quality is a key kind of concern that we're trying to address as we enable these projects. So, with the executive order and later the SB 122 authority, the state of play at the moment is that we know that there are areas where there's just more inherent risk to performing recharge, where there's a high likelihood of groundwater contaminants being present, places where they've just applied fertilizer on working land, dairy sites, a number of places. This is, of course, a statewide issue, but it really comes into focus in the Central Valley, where you have a lot of nitrates in a lot of places, and you have a large number of communities that depend on groundwater for their source of drinking water. So it's really key that we get this right. So there is risk, but then the question also mentioned that some folks also view this as an opportunity to actively address groundwater contamination with flushing the system. We've seen research that has pointed to both the fact that this is a potential benefit if we apply recharge in a very specific manner, but it's also, again, it's a risk because we don't want to be doing projects that are indeed flushing contaminants out of that vadose zone into where groundwater is being extracted for drinking water. So one of the initiatives that we're hoping to see is that we do believe that there's a role for the state to exercise some leadership in this regard. And one of the first things we really need is a true understanding of water quality, in groundwater basins, which we have some information, but we really need a lot more. We need many more monitoring wells. We need data sampling that's a lot more frequent than what we have now. A lot of places we're seeing annual or semi-annual testing. We need to see something that's a way more frequent, just to have a better real-time understanding of what the conditions are. And then we need a lot of coordination. There's a number of different state initiatives that are looking at this issue, but they're all coming at it from different angles. So Currently we have CV salts in the Central Valley that's being overseen by the Regional Water Board there. And they're going to need to do a lot more monitoring to really get specifically at that nitrate issue. But it's really important that we design these programs so that when we are increasing monitoring on one program, they're sharing that information with, say, the GSAs, who have an interest in this information, and they're sharing it with other folks that are doing recharge. So there's definitely a role to, and that's kind of the first problem to solve, is to truly understand the water quality impacts. And then we can start making informed decisions, and we can start looking at science and saying, is this an area where if we targeted recharge and ensured that there was a replacement water supply available for a community, would that be an appropriate project to do? That's a question we can begin to answer with more information. And I'll turn it over to Aisha because I know her team's working on answering those questions.
Yeah, we're currently right in the midst of working on this very problem. It's one of our technical documents that Rochelle mentioned earlier is about kind of guidance on how to do recharge to at least not negatively impact or reduce risk of water quality from on-farm recharge. Right now, but that's kind of was the beginning of our thinking. And right now we're engaged with DWR and actually many folks on this call, academics as well, NGOs, academics, state agencies, to really try to understand what occurred, if we could tell what occurred from the 2023 recharge that occurred from executive order. Can we see any kind of water quality impacts, whether positive or negative? And if so, were they due to recharge or were they due to, background recharge that was occurring just from precipitation? Can we see any factors that we can tease out of one site being more beneficial than another? And out of this, we're really trying to develop kind of a consensus-based approach of moving forward with a lot of experts, a lot of people who are very interested in this to understand, places where we need more monitoring, for instance, that Charles was just mentioning. Also convening, what can we glean from all the publicly available data and maybe even privately available data that we have? Can we make a decision support tool that will really help to determine where are the real easy places to do recharge and where are the places that we really don't want to do recharge? And all of this really has an eye in the end towards community drinking water impact. So we really want to make sure to be protective of community drinking water, to see if we can use recharge to actually supplement drinking water quantity while also protecting, potentially even improving water quality. So this is something that we're actively engaged in. I would just say stay tuned.
Yeah, I think that's the most exciting thing in terms of helping out the folks in the Central Valley with poor water quality coming out of their taps, is this ability to actually improve it. So that's really exciting work, a great potential solution. So hopefully it works out that way. Okay. Well, this is a question I don't know if you can answer. Does the state have a guidance document on how to map suitable recharge sites and quantifying the recharge benefit of them? And I think maybe you have a tool that might do something like that.
Yeah, we have been working on, I guess since 2017 on the groundwater recharge assessment tool, which helps to really link conveyance, site suitability, soil type, crop compatibility. So just a number of different, and when water is available for recharge, to be able to understand and advise districts on where to apply recharge in a way that is going to maximize the benefits. So that has really been looking at it from the perspective of how do you get the most water in the ground. One way that we're really excited to see that tool, which we call GRAP for short, expand, is that we're currently in the midst of working with the Department of Water Resources on a number of watershed studies in the San Joaquin Valley. And we're looking at, what's the fate of that applied recharge water. So it's not just, how much is being put underground, but how much is staying in that local aquifer? How much is that water benefiting community drinking water? How much is it benefiting groundwater dependent ecosystems? So we're able to, we're excited about these future, how these watershed studies will be able to inform these next iterations of GRAT in a way where we're not just going to be able to advise districts on how to maximize applied water for recharge, but also look at the fate of that groundwater. So just really exciting work that we're in the midst of, and I think that work should be starting to come out by the end of the year.
Okay, great. And I'll just add another thing that I heard many, many years ago, right? It was right after a few years after Sigma passed, Maurice Hall gave a talk, and he was talking about groundwater depletion from surface water depletion from groundwater pumping. And he talked about the possibility of putting a recharge basin in between, like, close to the water, the surface water, and using recharge basin as a way to mitigate groundwater depletions of surface water. So I don't know if we'll see that. That's just now becoming a thing for groundwater management. Now is going to be the interconnected surface water, and DWR is doing a lot of work, so stay tuned. But I thought that was fascinating, and I hadn't heard anyone talk about it since. That was probably like 7 years ago. Okay. A hitch with our project is the applicant can't apply or hold the 5-year permit. Solution?
So
Can tribes hold a permit?
Without knowing the particulars of the situation, it's hard to say what the specific hitch up might be. I would hazard a guess that the region that this is occurring in is probably a fully appropriated system, which may just be making that harder. There's a number of process-oriented issues that have come up, especially on the appropriative side. It sounds like the issue here is that it's just not even possible to file an application, which that's a problem, of course, and I would be interested in knowing more about that. But there's also, even in the course of filing an application, there's quite a lot of processes that an applicant is still having to do, even under an expedited permit. One specific area that we've heard is that they're still having to do water availability analyses as part of these, which is this extremely complex operation. Usually requires a very sophisticated consultant to do that kind of work. There's also a policy problem with that, in that this is really a function that we would like to see more help from the state on, kind of a more centralized and comprehensive information set available to applicants, rather than having a patchwork responsibility on applicants to kind of put out this information. That's just one example of some of the issues that are structural to these permits. So I don't know if it's applicable to this particular situation, but I would encourage the person asking this question, feel free to reach out to us directly on this, and we can provide a little more information, with the knowledge that we're not consultants, so don't take, this is not legal advice, but I think we can kind of help to point to some more specific avenues here.
Okay, great. And I'll be sure to include that information in the follow-up email. And go ahead.
And we love to learn about these challenges so that can inform our policy work and how we might make improvements system-wide. So yes, please do get in touch so that we can learn more.
Great, thank you. Okay, next question. Not all areas are equally feasible or suitable for recharge for many reasons: heavy soil, intolerant crops, pollutant mobilization, block subterranean flow paths. Since MAR is all optional, how do optimum MAR locations get incentivized?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really great opportunity for the expansion of the groundwater recharge assessment tool, GRAT, because it does take so many of these considerations into account. And provides recommendations for, if you have limited water available, where you would put that to maximize the benefits of recharge. So, definitely if you've got a project in mind, we'd be happy to chat with you about it and, see if GRAT is a good fit. Joe, I saw you come off mute too, so feel free to pop in.
I just wanted to add that the way SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, has been developed is really to have each individual subbasin develop their own ways of reaching solutions for their very unique challenges. And so incentives are typically, other than like the USDA, like federal agency, like offered incentives, like incentives are for SGMA are typically set up by the local GSAs, Groundwater Sustainability Agency. And so really kind of each incentive structure is met with the local characteristics and are there groundwater pumping allocations, as you mentioned, Chris, earlier, with Tulare Irrigation District and other districts that also have, and county, like non-district lands. So really the incentives piece to that is typically kind of a site-by-site basis or sub-basin by sub-basin basis. So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
I'll add one more layer onto that, which is that floodmar projects and incentivizing those specifically. There's a couple of other levers that might not be extant for some of the just SGMA-based projects. There's a lot of floodplain restoration that tends to go along with these kinds of projects, and there's a number like incentivization. To me, that's really two different processes. One is active incentivization, which, as Joe mentioned, can take the form of the local GSA building something into their allocation scheme as an example. But really, there's also just direct funding of these kinds of projects. It's important that we recognize the need for ecosystems, especially in this context. We've got a water bond that may or may not be happening. That's one appropriate avenue to talk about it. But just continuing support from the state and federal government to kind of recognize these projects and to prioritize them. That's kind of active incentivization. And then there's just clearing the way so that these projects can happen naturally. We have proponents that really want to do this kind of stuff. We haven't really talked about one of the other lanes that sustainable conservation is really active in, but we do a lot of work on efficient and smart permitting on restoration. And that's where that can really kind of get tied into that process as well, so that we're not seeing beneficial projects environmentally, water supply wise, that are going through, some of these years-long efforts, to get it permitting. So that's, just sort of creating the pathway in addition to kind of providing the resources as well.
Yes, the Cutting the Green Tape Initiative. Yes. Okay, I'm going to ask this question that came in by email because I want to make sure that they get it answered. How do you understand the role of beaver ponds in groundwater recharge, and how can we accelerate the reintroduction of beavers, given that we now have ways to control the level of the ponds with flow devices, aka beaver deceivers? Okay.
Yeah, we actually looked into beavers, their kind of occurrence and their potential in the San Joaquin Valley. We actually made a paper. It's kind of internal. We sent it out to some folks. Definitely beavers have a place in our ecosystem. Of course, some people love them, some people hate them. And so there's a way of kind of working with them that some folks have really developed, leading the way. Occidental Arts and Ecology Center, for instance, real beaver believers, as they say. And there's actually a new program at California Department of Fish and Wildlife to actually really manage the kind of relationship between humans and beavers, because they can be very beneficial. They can also, of course, be destructive. So we think beavers are an important part of kind of our natural infrastructure building. We're kind of just, open. If you have a project in mind, you want to see something where you can do recharge plus beavers, definitely contact us. But we kind of take it kind of in part and parcel with all the other work that we're doing as well. So please reach out.
And there was an article that I found a couple months back where they found like the way to make, because the farmers and people don't like them sometimes where they build their dams and stuff. It's kind of destructive to their property or whatever. So they found a way to make the like beavers, the sound, it had to do with the sound of running water. I think the person that asked this question is getting at this, but where they did some things where they could control where the beavers built their dam. So if they didn't want to build a dam there, then they did something that would trick the beaver so they wouldn't build the dam there. They go build in places that people were more happy with. If I can find that article, I will. I'll include it in the follow-up email. But okay.
Yeah, and just a follow up, there's a lot of innovative work in this realm. A lot of times they do block culverts because of the sound of running water. And so there's innovative kind of technical solutions. And surprisingly, a lot of the refuges have a lot of issues with beavers. Even though they want the beavers in there, the refuges do have to move water around to different locations, and the beavers can block that. So learning how to work with them, even in an ecosystem area of interest, can be challenging, but there's a lot of work in that that's already going on.
Okay, next question. What are the potential impacts to wildlife, fish populations, if more water is being taken from the rivers, or has modeling shown that floodmar has no effect? Yeah, this is the one concern I know that environmentalists have with floodmar. It's like, you know, the only water that these ecosystems get are from these big floods, and now you want to take that too. So what are
Yep.
those potential impacts?
I'll take a first stab at this one. So the floodmar watershed studies that we're working on do include some ecosystem considerations. Number one, they keep the 90-20 rule, which means that basically in the 90th percentile flow, you can only take 20% of the remaining flow available for recharge. That's one rule. You know, people debate the efficacy of that particular rule, but that is basically a pretty a policy standard in California. And the other is that delta conditions are an excess flow. So that's another type of protection. On top of that, the watershed studies also include some of what they call the California Environmental Flows Framework conditions. And so these are basically having peak flows that you need for ecosystem function. You have a spring pulse flow that allows the out migration of juvenile salmon. You also have some kind of like a winter base flow, so you're not taking all the water out. So I think there are ways to make sure that recharge that is diverted for, water that is diverted for recharge is not negatively affecting the ecosystem function. However, it could go either way. It's really about the specifics of the river. And so we really want to kind of dive into that. And there's a lot of effort in this going on as well in this realm of what is the functional flow regime of a particular river. And so we definitely want to see more of that type of study. I also just want to mention that typically when we're talking about floodmar, these are in like big water years. So we're not talking about dry or moderate years. At least that's the realm that we work in. And so, there are some folks definitely concerned, rightly so, that we're taking away these very beneficial flood flows. But there's also years like 2023 where there's just so much water that there's probably not much argument about being able to take some of those excess flood flows. It's just a matter of how we determine it and how we manage it, I think.
So did we have, speaking of wet years, was there any floodmar done this winter? We had a reasonably wet year.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. Out of stakeholders that we work with, I know that Turlock Irrigation District did do some recharge this winter and actually still ongoing. They diverted pre-flood releases off of the Tuolumne River to two of their on-farm recharge pilot sites, which were part of our Department of Water Resource contract from last year. And so those were on almond orchards, which now is closed off because it is the growing season. They also opened up and delivered water to private landowners' ponds. And these ponds weren't necessarily constructed for recharge, but more so for reservoirs that they would use to irrigate. But they're delivering water to those because there are infiltration benefits to those sites. And they actually have just kicked off an idle lands program. So landowners who have idle fields, whether those are old orchards where the trees, where they've exceeded their productive life and they have knocked those trees down and haven't replanted them yet, or other fields that might just not be actively growing crops. So Turlock ID has done some recharge this year. And then also I've heard of other projects like off of the Cosumnes River. There's a vineyard up there that is used for recharge off of that river every year. And I believe I read an article that like Westland's Water District is also doing some recharge down there. But again, Turlock is the main district that we work with who did allow for recharge. Madera Irrigation District, for example, they ran such a long year last year that this year they really needed to dry their system out and do canal maintenance, so they weren't able to. But yeah, those are a couple recharge aspects or recharge projects and sites that I'm familiar with this year.
Okay, great. And Aisha, you had a question. Did you send me a text?
Yeah, I got a question from somebody else who sent it directly to me. I don't know if you want to address this one.
Please do. Please do.
Yeah, this question is from someone out here. How about improve stakeholder engagement in groundwater recharge? What's being done to ensure community is at the forefront of decision making? So I'll just answer it. I'll ask it and answer it. So we've been working with one community, Fairmead. They were interested in doing groundwater recharge to improve their drinking water well, which they were running out of water, basically. They don't really have water quality problems at this point, and they were interested in improving their groundwater resilience. And so our approach, and I think a good approach in general, is to really make sure that communities are at the forefront of decision making. And the only way through that is to engage with the community, spend the time to really work with the community. As our nonprofit, we're not really, we don't have a lot of people out on the ground, out in the valley. And so we really depend heavily on other organizations, other NGOs that do work directly with communities. And so really making sure that we're listening, that we're taking in people's opinions, their concerns, and integrating that into any kind of project designs. We're right now kind of in phase 2 of the Fairmead Groundwater Resilience Project. It's got recharge in there. It's also got land repurposing aspects, which is something we haven't really touched on, but we are working with some folks in land repurposing. There's a lot of ability to take kind of the land that kind of needs to come out of production, but turn it towards something that has positive community and grower impacts as well, that really benefits everyone. So I would just say it's important to keep communities at the forefront.
Okay, great. I think we have time for one more question. Is there a standard for terms of recharge and meaning leave behind and rights to the grower recharging? I think Charles knows something about this.
Yeah, so currently there is no kind of applicable standard across all the different basins for this. And this is actually something that's being worked out in real time in a number of regions. So I mentioned, and you mentioned, Chris, that we have, in Tulare, we already have some, built-in incentives. And by incentives, we mean that growers have basically access to a certain portion that they can recharge, under the allocation that they're working under. So that's one possible way, but that issue of leave behinds, the answer is, it's somewhere in between 0 and 100, because really what we're trying to get at with a leave behind is that we're ensuring meaningful sustainability is being met when we're doing recharge. It has to get the basin into a better state of being, and really ultimately reaching those Sigma goals, that we're trying to get to. But it also has to be a meaningful, incentive to get people to participate in recharge, and we talk a lot, about on-farm recharge. Ideally, to me, if we have a working system, all the places where it's appropriate to pursue recharge, then people are willing to do it. They're able to access the water to perform that recharge with. And so incentives are part of that structure. So that this has occurred, in the context of Sigma. It's a discussion that's been had in the context of multi-benefit land repurposing over in Department of Conservation's program. And there really isn't a consensus yet, other than the need to address kind of both of those sides of the equation. I don't anticipate that there's going to be a standardized structure for that. But it'll be interesting to see what local solutions emerge out of this, because I do suspect that it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all situation. I think in places where they're facing more immediate threats to sustainable yield, they may have a different attitude towards what a leave behind would look like, as opposed to another place. But we're learning more, and that's developing, and then we're going to learn from each other as that moves forward.
And by leave behind, you mean leaving water in the aquifer?
Yeah, so let's say
Okay.
just if someone recharges 100 acre feet, how much of that 100 acre feet will then be available for pumping later, just to simplify that.
Yeah, I know that the Kern Water Bank and others there's a leave behind that they've implemented. So, okay, excellent. Well, we've answered a lot of questions. I'm sorry that we could not get to everybody's question today, but I thank you. A lot of great information. Thank you for coming in and participating in office hours. And folks, our next office hour will be 2 weeks from today, April 22nd. We will be discussing multi-benefit land repurposing program with Ann Hayden. So I'll include a registration link with that. Thank you again, everybody. I would ask the room to give you a round of applause, but a lot of great information. I appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks for having us, Chris. And thanks
Great,
everyone
thanks.
for your
Bye, everyone.
questions.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Post-eclipse afternoon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.